Welcome on in, guys. Tobin here with you. Thanks for checking out the channel. Hope you're doing fantastic out there, huh? Miami Heat, they had their exit interviews today. A lot of things that we got to dive into over this, so there'll be a couple of videos kind of ping-ponging about this. But I did find a couple of things interesting. I said this today on the radio show when this was going on because I saw that the Miami Heat were looked at as, the Miami Heat, disappointing year, right? And part of that has to do with the fact that they just weren't durable this year, and there were so many injuries, and they got to figure that out. And Erik Spoelstra had some interesting things to say about that. So I'm definitely going to go there first. But I woke up today in Las Vegas, and wouldn't you know it, the first thing I see is Get Up on ESPN, and these mother bleepers. It was, 6 o'clock this time because I had to head over to the media center. And they're talking about potential stars going to the Philadelphia 76ers, which, first of all, is very adorable, right? These Philadelphia 76ers get to sit there, no criticism, no beef. They're all sitting, this is going to be the greatest Sixers offseason all the time because everybody kisses Daryl Morey's ass, right? And we're not going to sit here and talk about them, getting bounced or their issues or any of that stuff. We're going to say, things are going to be peachy keen with them, right? And Windhorse gets on there, and he's talking about the idea that keep an eye on the Philadelphia 76ers looking towards the Miami Heat and Jimmy Butler. He says first the big obvious one is Paul George. That's kind of been a thing kicked around that if Paul George doesn't work out in L.A., that they could sign him to a max deal and bring him into the fold. They got like $60 million in cap space. I saw somebody say today, they could sign two max guys. I don't think you've seen what these salaries are like these days. This isn't like back in the day where you're getting $30 million a year. But so I don't think that they're going to have that kind of space. But let's just say the Paul George thing doesn't work out, that Wendy's putting it out that they could divert to him or possibly Brandon Ingram, right? The cold water I would throw on this is a couple things. What would make it nuclear? What would put some embers on it? Joel Embiid, Jimmy Butler, close relationship, friendship, have flirted with the idea. Jimmy's tried to flirt with the idea of getting him down to Miami before. And so that is the natural connection there. And it's not the same front office that wouldn't pay him. It wasn't Daryl Morey running the show back then. So I don't know if there's necessarily a burned bridge there with the Philadelphia 76ers. I don't know what the ownership situation is. The thing that I look at, though, with them as an issue is like, well, okay, let's just say they're going to trade the Heat and they're going to trade Jimmy Butler into space because they don't have any bodies. It's Maxey, it's Joel. I imagine they're not going to trade either one of those guys for Jimmy Butler. What are they trading the Miami Heat? Or the Miami Heat? You think the Miami Heat are going to just trade Jimmy Butler for picks? I'm skeptical on that. And then especially today, a couple of things happened at Media Day that I found interesting. I said this today on the show as it was going on, and I was like, the only way media exit day is interesting today is if Jimmy Butler speaks. That's the only way. Because everything else, he doesn't ever do it. If you give Jimmy Butler the idea of a voluntary media day, he's going to show up 0 times out of 100 to a voluntary media day. And so if he showed up today, I was then going to be like, okay, he wants something out there publicly, and he didn't. He still did not show up today. He didn't show up. Terry Rozier didn't show up. Obviously, they're both dealing with injuries. Tyler Hero also did not speak. Also not the first time that he has skipped out on that. He skipped out, I believe, on it last year with the broken hand. The year before that, he did it because I remember asking him about if he was going to be ready for the finals. So Tyler hasn't done it the last couple of years. Jimmy never does it. Terry Rozier first year, he's dealing with the neck thing. He didn't do it. So, all right, none of that was surprising to me. The people who spoke were the usual suspects. Bam, who had some interesting things to say. We can get into him in I think, another round of this stuff. But Erik Spoelstra, he had some interesting things to say about Jimmy Butler that kind of opened into the future because Erik Spoelstra talked about the excitement he has on their chapter that they're going into, and that he is going to be in this spot where, he is looking forward to it. He said he thinks Jimmy Butler is, quote, he'll be extremely, this is from Zach Weinberger, quote, he will be extremely motivated. We will be heading into our 6th year together. I can't wait for training camp. And it was interesting because Erik Spoelstra definitely seemed like a guy at these pressers. Now, mind you, I wasn't there. You guys know I'm in Vegas. But reading the quotes and knowing how Spo ticks with the media, he first of all seems like he almost can't wait to hop back into it and get back after this. But kind of did a little bit of Riley where he's throwing out the challenge to Tyler, to Jimmy Butler, because to Tyler, he said something to the effect of like, I bet you he takes the same amount of days off that I did. We need to see him continue to be able to take away teams that are trying to take him away. He said the biggest positive he had, one game where the entire Boston game plan was to take him out and to respond in a big way in game 2. That helped drive the win and is a massive positive. That's what's going to drive him and motivate him. He'll probably have the same number of days off that I will, and we'll learn from his experiences. And so to me, I read that as like, yeah, there still has to be a lot of improvement in the game. And to be fair to Tyler, I know I've been hard on him off of that playoff series because he did not perform well outside of that game 2. I know that he's not supposed to be the one on this team. He's not supposed to be the focal point on this team. And you saw, the comments Udonis Haslem had where, he's better served as a 6th man, and maybe that'll be the case. I do think that for Erik Spoelstra, he's now going to do what he wants. Let's just say, Tyler is back next year, right? Because they just don't feel like getting nothing back for him. There's not going to be, I think, this level of feelings with him. I think if that is the way he wants to go, he'll do it. And I think Tyler would do it too. I don't think that he would make a stink about it. He'd be honest about it that he doesn't want to do it. But if that is the case, that Spo wants to put him in that and he wants to start a Duncan Robinson and they get somebody else in the fold, I think that's Spo's going to feel a little bit more liberated to do that, because when you go as far as they go, maybe you're a little bit wary on changing things. When you get an embarrassing exit like this, you're open to all changes. That's really the case of it. Here's the full thing on Butler. He says, going into whatever chapter this is, one of the later chapters of his career, this is like the sweet spot, the beauty, where you get to go work with somebody together for 6 years. We'll be heading into our 6th year of work together. I can't wait for training camp. I found that to be an important quote from Erik Spoelstra because there is a little bit of smoke, or people are wondering, is there going to be smoke with him and the organization with this whole extension thing? So, where will they be at with it? When do they look at this and be like, all right, we've had our fill. We're ready. We're done. And it didn't sound like he was at that point. But he did make a point that he doesn't want them to be, he said today, we're not a load management team, and that they do have to take the regular season more seriously. And to me, if that is a message to anybody, that's to Jimmy. This cannot be a year. And there was a lot of talk of they're going to look for answers as to why they have so many injuries, why there is all these physical problems. Everybody dealt with something this year, man. Everybody. Was it a cursed snake bit year? Because you look at the Celtics, you look at the Denver Nuggets, these are very, very healthy teams. It is a big reason, and it does feel like with the Miami Heat, because Erik Spoelstra likes to put up this blockade of we have enough, almost the fan base isn't even allowed to bring it up. And I'm not saying that the Heat would have been good enough to do anything this year, even if it did have its full audit, but you certainly got to have thought would have had a better regular season record than they did, because they did have a better record than last year. More starting lineups than they've ever had. And then on top of it, yeah, Jimmy is a playoff. He's a playoff player. He is. And he didn't have him. So when he goes out there and he talks about this, he says, on the regular season. We're going to look at everything, but to say that we philosophically don't take the regular season seriously is totally off base. I can see why people would point to that because of the missed games. We're not a load management team. There are still opportunities to find ways to win a handful more games, but our goal is not to be in the play-in every year, and we have to work to find ways we can improve across the board. That is one of the things with Wade is like there were years. The year before he left, the challenge was kind of thrown down to him before he ended up going to Chicago, and he had a great year. He did. He had a great year for the Miami Heat. That again was plagued a little bit by others with injuries. But then of course they got wary and didn't give him his extension, and he ended up in Chicago. Do the Miami Heat want to end up in a place where their face of the franchise leaves and walks because of essentially a 1-year extension? I don't know. Again, I think the way that I lean at it more is I think they're going to end up giving it to him, but I think that there are going to be talks with him about, the ways that he can not miss that many games every year. Look, he's always a guy who misses games because of how physically he plays, but there has to be something physically different that Jimmy has to do, whether that's come in lighter, whether that's train a little bit different, or I don't know. I'm not a trainer. I'm not a doctor. I don't know, but the spring in the step wasn't quite there. Maybe just the whole summer of rest will help, and that'll help him get fresher. But they need Jimmy Butler to turn back the clock a little bit, because it really looked like it was grinding down to a slower pace this year. Talked about in the last video about the numbers Bobby Marks put out there about him at the rim. That's supposed to be his sweet spot. So does that mean Jimmy has to get more become more of a proficient shooter? All these things have to be on the deck. And so when Spo says this is kind of the sweet spot, you have to figure out how does a star age gracefully. With Dwayne, it was, he was going to come back and he come off the bench. But they were really blessed with Dwayne, that Dwayne came back and did a couple of years on the min. Especially that last dance year where he might not have come back. And Dwayne was, it's crazy to think about, but Dwayne Wade and his career, we talked all of this debate about where he was at and what to do. And it's not so much the money that's the funny thing. It's the time, because 35, 34, they thought, nah, too old to pay. All right, Jimmy's already past that. And he got one more year and he finished this thing off at 37. That essentially, this window where Dwayne was gone, it did feel like a piece of the franchise was missing. And until he got back, it didn't feel right. Yeah, there were some moments with the 41-41 season of cool stuff with Dion Waiters and Goran Dragic. But the other times, those other years, that felt right having Dwayne Wade back. All the good feelings, even with Jimmy not being quite the same personality as Dwayne, the guy's competitiveness and the guy's will to win and all that stuff. I think if this can bring a more motivated, a hungrier Jimmy Butler, and not a flip the switch, buying into the mythology type of Jimmy Butler, then I think they could be in an okay spot for this for these twilight years with him. They still need to find other guys to produce. Like, they do need to find him, viable wingmen who can help. And either that's, you do talk about this a little bit about how they retooled the utilization of Bam Adebayo with the roster, or find some more offensive punch. They can't go back out, it feels like, with the same ingredients and expect a much better recipe.